Warm apple pie. Warm apple pie with a hint of vanilla, sort of like a fancy pie. In perhaps the most magical moment of my life, this amazing smell gave my senses, especially touch, a good run for their money. I was head over heels in Angela Tallarico, a first for both of us, and while it wasn't the smoothest or best thing either of us would have ever had, it was still our first, and for me it was a sensory overload. And yet, in the midst of it all, I could smell a combination of her perfume, hairspray, and, yes, sweat, and she smelled amazing. More than 40 years later, I can close my eyes and remember that smell. I don't remember the sex itself as well as the smell. I won't pretend it was love-making. It was two people trying to pretend they were making love in the back seat of my mother's 1972 Ford Limited. It was our senior year's prom, and like many teenagers, we lost our virginities on that special night. However, it is notable that Angela and I did not go to prom or any other weekend event that everyone is planning around this event. I walked up behind her in the movie theater line, and she smiled shyly. I smiled back at her, and we both laughed. While almost everyone else at Camac South High School was attending prom, we two misfits walked into the movie theater unaccompanied on a beautiful May evening in 1974. Angela and I have known each other since my family moved to the city 5 years ago. My official name is Nicholas T.R. Sinknarvsky, and since both of our last names began with the letter T, I very often sat right behind Angela in the classes we took together over the years. During this time, we went from simple acquaintances to pretty good friends and whatever the hell we call it. Anyway, she was my first, and I was hers. They always say that the employees at Ellis Island shortened the names of many immigrants when they came to the United States because they could not spell or understand them. If this is true, then I don't even want to know what my real last name is. I always felt like I had to score a 100 on every spelling test I took just for spelling my name correctly. Maybe that's why to my family I'm Nikki, but to everyone who is important in my life, and even everyone who isn't that important, I'm just called Trick. Except for Angela, I was always Nicholas, pronounced with all three syllables, not two syllables merged. It was easy to tell that Angela didn't think very highly of me during the first year my family lived in the city. I was a small, skinny guy with thick, dark brown, unruly hair. Depending on who you talked to, I was either a quirky genius or a lazy slacker, and both were probably true to some extent. If I wanted, I could get excellent grades, but I rarely had the desire. I was bored to tears most of the time at school, and my competitive spirit was dulled when I learned how many kids cheated to get good grades. Most of the time I just showed up, kept my mouth shut, and was one of the many anonymous kids. Angela, on the other hand, was almost my exact opposite. She was incredibly smart, perhaps the smartest girl in our class, and was as competitive as anyone I had ever met. She was relentless and had no intention of letting anyone hold her back. She found it difficult to tolerate lesser luminaries asking questions of her teachers, probably because she felt they were slowing down her learning. At that time, she also did not have tact and was very straightforward in her interactions with everyone. Along the way, anyone must have explained it to her tactfully and at least made her be tolerant. No one questioned why she didn't have many friends. Angela was not only a force to be reckoned with in class, but also a force to be reckoned with physically. She also weighed about 150 pounds, with early breasts and quite large. Despite the huge glasses she wore, I thought she was pretty, with dirty shoulder-length blonde hair, dark blue or brown eyes, and pale white skin, typical of northern Italy. For comparison, I scored 4'11" and weighed 68 pounds. Perhaps it had something to do with the young woman not knocking down my door. I had 2 lessons with Angela, and I bet she didn't say more than a dozen words to me all year. Anyway, for me, it was pretty typical of how the year went, since I was new to school and hardly anyone spoke to me. In 8th grade, my social life took on a certain moniker, but my relationship with Angela remained consistently frosty. Then, in 9th grade, she occasionally deigned to talk to me a few words here and there. Either way was fine with me because by that point I had made a few good friends and had a small social life, and as far as dating goes, Well, Angela wasn't dating anyone because I don't think there was a guy in our high school who had the desire or courage to ask her out. Long Island was a mecca for Italian girls, and in ninth grade, all I looked up to was Jennifer Armorali, a dark-skinned Southern Italian who had the biggest feet to walk on earth and wore short skirts and nude tights to show them off. According to Bob Seger, she was a black-haired beauty with big dark eyes, and she carried her whole position high, hard, and high. My love was only from afar because I never had the courage to ask her out. Between my freshman and sophomore year, biology smiled on me, and over the summer I grew 5 inches and reached 5'7" 112 and 116 pounds. It was as if the whole world had opened up again for me, and girls who had not paid attention to me before suddenly realized that I was alive. Yes, I still had a mop of long, unruly hair, but now I was actually taller than many of the girls who used to literally look down on me. Perhaps it was because we were now seeing each other almost face to face. Angela seemed much friendlier to me. We actually had some deep conversations, and I began to realize that she was not an automatic machine without feelings. She actually had quite a lot of feelings, and I got the feeling that there was a real girl out there somewhere just waiting to break free. I went out of my way to talk to her and her. Of course, she was still the driven Angela, but I got to see a part of her that I don't think many others saw. We even sat together at lunch a few times and talked. I learned that she wants to become a heart surgeon and plans to attend Cornell University to achieve this. To me, I was going to become a taxi driver. No, just kidding. I wanted to be a sports journalist and was heading to the University of Missouri. She told me that she thought I could do more with my life, noting how well I did on important state tests and things like that where everyone was on a level playing field. She noted that my grades weren't much lower than hers, especially since I wasn't wasting my precious time studying. We became such good friends that I took her snide comments as a way to push me further. Somewhere along the line, she must have succeeded because I ended up at Marist College studying translation. I was fluent in French by the time I graduated from high school and knew all 6 tenses, which was pretty good because most French people only know 4. Italian was also easy for me. Although Angela did not have many friends, she was involved in many committees and activities throughout high school. When one of these groups held a special event, I often became their groom. Even though we weren't a couple, this caused a lot of surprised looks among our peers. Angela dated sometimes in high school. I couldn't boast of a lot of dates, but I had more than her. At my senior year prom, I asked out a girl I liked but hadn't dated yet, and she turned me down. I was disappointed, but not depressed. Several of my friends tried to talk me into taking another friend who really wanted to go to prom but was never invited. However, I had no desire to just go with just anyone, so I told them that I was not going to the prom just for show. That's how I ended up in the cinema alone on graduation night. Looks like loser is spelled T-R-I-K. Angela and I watched the movie together, and even though it was only 11 o'clock when it ended, I asked her to have a beer with me. In New York, the legal age to buy alcohol was 18, and there was a bar in our city that I had been a regular at since I was that age, and that's where I took Angela. Judging by her face after the first few sips, she had probably never drunk beer before, but she took it in her stride and finished her half of the pitcher I bought. We just talked like normal people, although I noticed that she was getting a little drunk because she started giggling and stumbling over some of her words. We were sitting in 2 places at a table for 4, and somehow she started moving closer and closer to me while we were talking. I decided that 1 pitcher was enough for the evening since I was driving, and after I paid the waitress, we both got up to leave. We were practically standing on top of each other at that moment, and I'm not entirely sure what was driving me, but I leaned down and softly kissed her on the lips. The kiss lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds, but I saw her face turn red as we parted our lips, although neither of us backed down. Then she herself reached out to me and initiated the next kiss, although this kiss was no longer so soft. At that moment, all my ability to reason left me. The next thing I remember, I pulled the car into a dark spot at the end of the parking lot, and we both climbed into the big, comfortable back seat. Again, I'm not entirely sure how we both got undressed. We kissed and awkwardly touched each other, then we had sex. I was lying half on top of her, half on my side in the back seat, and we were both breathing heavily when she suddenly started giggling. I immediately tensed up, thinking I had done something wrong, but she put a finger to my lips to calm me down. Do you know how many of our friends do the same thing as us, but paid $200 or more for the privilege, and we only spent $12? I understood her joke and also started laughing with her. We lay in the back seat and kissed for another 5 minutes before we realized it was time to get dressed and take her back to the movie theater so she could pick up her dad's car. We talked about everyday things again without any confessions of eternal love for each other. I think we both knew it was one of those unexpected moments in life, and we were smart enough to enjoy it. I turned off the engine as I pulled up to her dad's car in the movie theater parking lot. Before she could open the door, I pulled her close, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "Thank you for your gift. I will cherish it forever." I saw that she was amazed, and believe me, Angela Tallarico was not so easily amazed. Her big eyes widened, but she didn't answer. We kissed tenderly using our tongues, then she got out of the car, got into hers, and drove away. I never told anyone about that night, and I guess she didn't either. It seemed to me that our relationship had not changed one iota because of this. I thought about that night every day for the next few weeks. I knew I didn't love her. I knew she didn't love me. But there was something between us, and I needed to understand if I ignited it with a spark, would the fire break out. A week before graduation, I asked her out on a date, the following week after graduation. She gently refused, but I was amazed. I think she realized she hurt me because I'm pretty sure my mouth dropped open and I had tears in my eyes. At 18, most teenagers think they know everything. I, on the other hand, apparently knew nothing. I was broken. Of course, Angela became valedictorian of the class and, naturally, gave the valedictorian speech at the graduation ceremony the following week. I didn't hear a word from her, and not a word from other speeches and announcements. I sat next to the class joker, and Mike Lips Laskovitz continued the conversation throughout the ceremony. I had a hard time not to laugh several times, and I had a smile on my face the whole time. The ceremony lasted over an hour, and when it was over, my mother asked me why I was the only one who seemed to be enjoying the whole experience. She knew Lips, and when I pointed out to her that he was sitting next to me, she said she understood perfectly well. "Your father is not as funny as this guy. God, those speeches were so dry," she said. I worked at the local library and played softball with a group of seniors all summer. We had a pretty good team, and it was a great company. We often went for drinks after games, most of which we won. Several of us were leaving for school at the beginning of August, so we scheduled one last game for the whole team and had a final party for the guys and their girls and those who supported us. The game was late in the evening, and the party was planned in a friend's large backyard around 8. We beat the team from nearby Deer Park 11-0, so we were all in high spirits heading into the going-away party. The party had already been going on for about 10 minutes when I arrived there. I quickly grabbed a beer and started walking around the courtyard, grabbing snacks and greeting everyone. Lori Jarnevstein, the same girl who turned me down for prom, was there, and as I walked up to the small group of people she was with, she turned to me, smiled widely, and then planted a big kiss on my unsuspecting lips. I was shocked and only after a few seconds began to kiss her back. When we finished, I just looked at her and silently said, "Wow!" She smiled at me again, and for the next hour, she barely left my side. I'll admit, I was more than a little hopeful at the thought of having sex today. I was Lori's friend all through high school and always wanted something more, but didn't have the courage to ask her out until it was time for prom. She never explained why she rejected me, but I found out from my friends that she didn't go anywhere that night, so it wasn't that I was rejected by someone else. Lori had shoulder-length golden brown hair, bright blue eyes, and was simply gorgeous, according to many guys in Kamak South. She had a decent figure with normal breasts, and that evening she was wearing short, tight denim shorts and a blue string top with no bra. For the next hour, I held her by the waist, gently feeling her slightly tanned and toned abdominal muscles and gently stroking her almost naked back. She smiled at me and moved softly under my touch as we sat with friends at one of the picnic tables set up in the yard. And then a definitely disapproving voice was heard behind my right shoulder. "Sorry, Lori, but you're sitting in my seat," Angela said, looking down at Lori and me. We both raised our heads at the same time. Angela looked commanding as she looked at us over her glasses. My mouth opened, but no sounds came out. Lori paused, saw the stunned expression on my face, quietly stood up from the table, and walked away to another group. Just as calmly, Angela took the newly vacated seat and with the same naturalness put my right hand on her shoulder. Then she leaned towards me and gave me a fleeting kiss on the lips, as if we had been doing this all summer. "My place and my lips," she said firmly. I just nodded like a fool. The conversation that had been interrupted when Angela approached the table resumed as if nothing had happened. "You owe me," she whispered in my ear, "and I intend to get mine later tonight." I know I turned 3 shades of red. I also pressed her closer to me, and she responded willingly. The sight of Angela and me together caused many surprised glances directed in our direction. I tried my best not to look surprised. However, having her around me felt so natural, and we were just on the same page in so many ways. By the end of the night, several couples had agreed to do a little bar hopping. When I looked at Angela, she was already halfway to my car, beckoning me with her finger. "Uh, Seems like we have other plans," I said to my best friend Danny and his girlfriend. I have to go." When I caught up with Angela, she stepped towards me and gave me probably the most passionate kiss I had ever received, and then entered my mouth with her tongue. We had a full-on tongue duel for about a minute, and I know my eyes were glazed over when she finally pulled away. "Think you can find a quiet place to park?" she whispered, and I saw the light from the backyard reflected in her dark eyes. "Oh yeah," I muttered, leading her to the car and opening the passenger door for her. 5 minutes later, I found a secluded place, and 10 minutes later, we were both naked and breathing heavily. 20 minutes later, we were both cooling down from our sex. I thought she looked gorgeous in the moonlight that fell on the back seat. "Why?" I finally asked quietly. "And why did you refuse me a date earlier? I thought there was something between us." "There really was something between us, and it scared me. I didn't know how to deal with it," she replied. "Listen, Nicholas, you know I already have a path in life chosen, and we both know that long-distance relationships in college rarely work out. I didn't want to start something with you that would fall apart in 6 months and have you hate me later. I really value our friendship and don't want to lose it. I don't have many friends, and I can't afford to lose even one. So if we just stay friends." "Okay, I understand. But why tonight, and what was it with Lori?" "Considering that she denied you graduation, I decided that she had no right to you and wanted to make sure that you left with me tonight. I wanted you to go to college with the right attitude. But for me, it turned out even better. Where did you learn all this?" "It was wonderful," she exclaimed with delight. "Believe it or not, I learned this from reading Penthouse and Playboy," I said. "There's more to it than just pictures of naked women. There are words between these pictures." Who would have thought? This will definitely make you very popular in college," she said. After we got dressed and cleaned up a little, I took Angela home. I walked over to the passenger side of the car, opened the door for her, and helped her out. Then I gave her my best kiss. "Goodbye, Dr. Tallarico," I said in the most serious tone. "If you ever have some free time at Cornell, how about writing a letter to an old friend?" I got a pen and paper out of the car and wrote down my college address. "Goodbye, Nicholas," she said, putting my address in her shorts pocket, turned and walked back to her house. About a month later, I received a letter from Angela telling me about all the interesting things she was doing. About a week later, I responded, describing my life. A month later, I received a second letter and responded to that too, but that was the last letter I received. I understood her point. I hoped that one day I would just be a pleasant memory for her. I'm a pretty picky bastard, So I didn't just date a woman who wanted to shoot me, but when I went out and got to the point of having sex, neither of my partners ever gave up the desire. I'm proud to say that it's like eating at the home of a good Italian or Jewish chef. If you go home hungry, it's your fault. I felt and still feel that any woman who wanted more from me just had to ask. Like I said, I never went on dates just for numbers. I don't have that kind of ego. I also don't think I need to date the most beautiful girls, at least the most beautiful in appearance. Yes, it's a plus if a woman is as beautiful on the outside as she is on the inside, but what I'm really looking for is inner beauty. But now I'm whining about Angela again. The classes were interesting, to say the least. Since I was already fluent in French and had some CLEP credits, I took an easier language and a harder one in my first year, studying Italian and Chinese. I added Spanish and Russian as a sophomore, and then spent a semester in Italy during the first half of my junior year. I spent the second part of my first year in China. I was essentially off campus for my entire freshman year. During my senior year, I signed up for the only French class I could take, the highest level, but found myself a little rusty the first 2 weeks. We actually used a book a level below the one we used in senior year of high school. I could handle it, but I couldn't dominate like I used to, and to be honest, I wasn't comfortable with myself. The professor was one of those, let's get everyone involved people, so I approached her and asked for a favor. I would turn in any work she wanted and take the tests, but I didn't want to participate in any discussion classes within 2 weeks. I then explained to her that I would not only participate, but probably dominate to the detriment of the rest of the class. I guess Madam Crate had a hearing problem because she seemed to go out of her way to ask me questions over the next 2 weeks. This made me royally angry, and I remained silent. 2 weeks later, I was called to speak with the dean of the language department, who told me about Madam Crate's complaint. Dean Patrick, I said decisively, have you checked my progress recently? Is there anyone at this school who has a higher GPA in core classes than I do and has anywhere near the same linguistic diversity that I have? Wouldn't it be a shame if this year's faculty awarded the winner of quitting French due to professorial harassment and made sure everyone knew it at the banquet? I was feeling pretty smug at this point. Without saying a word, I turned around and walked towards the exit, and literally knocked my future wife off her feet. Tracy Patrick was the dean's daughter, and she was apparently walking through his door with lunch from the local bistro when I turned and walked right over her, knocking the bag of food out of her hands and sending her falling flat on her back. I was only about 6 feet tall, and this munchkin must have been about 5 feet tall, so I just saw the top of her blonde head when I bumped into her. At the time, I didn't know she was the dean's daughter, but I felt terrible that I had raised what seemed like the sweetest little thing I'd seen on campus. She blurted out a string of curse words in French, causing me to retreat from trying to help her off the floor. Without even thinking, I immediately began to apologize to her in perfect French. We then had a short conversation, also in French, before the dean introduced Sprite as his daughter, a final-year university student majoring in marketing. Obviously, seeing a beautiful young girl makes it much easier for you to speak French, he told me in French with a big smile on his face. Now take my daughter somewhere nice and apologize to her properly, and on the way back you can buy me another sandwich. This lunch was the first of many we would have during our senior year. It's hard to resist a beautiful woman with a petite hourglass figure who can hold a conversation for 1 minute and not laugh like a 5-year-old when someone tells a stupid joke. I asked her to marry me right before graduation. She accepted my ring and made me the happiest man on the planet. We planned the wedding for next spring at her home church near Marist. I landed a communications job with an international firm based in Washington, D.C., and Tracy immediately found a job in her field in our nation's capital. We decided to live near Washington, Virginia. We were close enough to play in town whenever we wanted, but far enough away that we were in our own world when we got home. In the first year, we did all the usual baby things on our own, including some wonderful weekends where we almost never got out of bed. An old saying goes, chance favors the prepared mind. My chance came just after we got married the following spring, when I was standing in line at Starbucks one lunch hour. These two young executives in front of me were talking about how their company needed to hire two people who knew business. Finding someone who speaks Spanish will not be difficult, but finding someone who speaks Russian will not be easy, they agreed. I knew I shouldn't have listened, but you could make it easier on yourself and just hire me and not hire a second person, I told the couple. They both looked at me questioningly, so I repeated my words twice, once in Spanish and once in Russian. "What are you drinking?" asked the taller one, who turned out to be an assistant to Vice President Michael Abrams of the medical device company 529 Orthopedics. The other man was the company's payroll manager, John Hardacre. The three of us sat down, and within 30 minutes, they explained to me about a new position they could create for me at the company and how this opportunity could become a career of a lifetime. I told them I needed to talk to my wife about it, and we scheduled the interview for 2 days later. It's hard to immediately turn down a job that doubled my pretty good salary. The only downside we could see was the occasional travel, but we both agreed it was worth it. In fact, we noted that with proper budgeting on our part, Tracy could be a full-time mom in a few years after we start having kids. Within 2 years of joining the company, my role had evolved into a combination of translator, business analyst, information specialist, and peace advocate, as my immediate boss, CEO Ralph Turner, liked to call me. Roughly speaking, I became Mr. Turner's right-hand man, his go-to person on many projects, and the person he turned to on many projects. Because I spoke 6 languages plus Arabic, I was often invited to important negotiations. I was not the official interpreter for these meetings, but my job was to make sure that what was said to Mr. Turner was not distorted. It was a bit of a hidden role, but sometimes I had to come out of the shadows to keep the negotiations going. These rare moments usually resulted in the official 529 interpreter losing his job and the other party sitting at the table with their faces downcast. At the age of 28, I was making incredible money and playing an important role in an international company. Tracy stopped working shortly before the birth of our first son, Joshua, 3 years ago, and 3 months ago, she gave birth to my daughter, Isabella. Tracy was a wonderful mother, driving her children to sports and activities, maintaining a comfortable home, becoming a top-notch cook, and actively volunteering for several non-profit organizations. She was also a wonderful hostess on the rare occasions when we received guests. Pregnancy only added about 10 pounds to Tracy as she worked out regularly at the gym on top of everything else she did. Those extra pounds seemed to go where they needed to go. She had no difficulty attracting attention wherever she went, whether in elegant clothes or sportswear. I had no problem with her being looked at, and she didn't seem to notice the admiring glances. Even my rare business trips were quite comfortable. Since I was part of the inner circle, I always flew business or first class, and 529 always put us up in great hotels. Sometimes in a hotel bar, a woman might show interest in me and offer to spend the evening together, but I always politely refused such offers. I was a devoted husband to one woman, although it was nice to know that some women didn't think I was a troll. I still had a head of unruly hair, although I now kept it shoulder length, and I was 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighed 180 pounds, working out regularly at the gym. Sometimes when a woman tried to get to know me, I would wonder about her story, especially if she was a married woman. There were even times when some of them shared their stories, and more often than not, I tried to convince them to try to make things better in their marriages. I guess someone could call me Dr. Phil, who speaks 6 languages. A few years later, we completed negotiations with a hospital in New York, and after a great dinner with the 529 team, I went to the hotel bar, which was dimly lit and almost empty. Although I did not turn my head, I immediately realized that a woman sat next to me because I smelled her perfume. "Will you buy an old friend a drink?" she asked in her straightforward tone, and I instantly recognized Angela. "Dr. Tallarico, I presume?" I asked cheerfully. "Always. Do you remember? As I told you many years ago, it's simply easier to keep your last name than to change it to your husband's last name." I looked carefully at her face. Except perhaps for the fact that her eyes now showed signs of pain and suffering, her face was much the same as I remembered. She was dressed for the evening and looked beautiful. She was still a large woman, standing about 5'10", but seemed a little slimmer than in her school days, perhaps weighing about 140 pounds. Her ample breasts and rounded shape added to her charm. I quickly took in her appearance, and most women wouldn't even notice how I looked at them. But it was Angela. Angela noticed everything. "Did I pass the test?" she asked mockingly. She blinked, waiting for an answer. Of course, it's Angela. "Yes," I answered with the same mockery. We both laughed and sighed. I ordered her Tanqueray with tonic. I knew from conversations with some old friends that she was an up-and-coming heart surgeon with a bright career ahead of her. I didn't expect anything else. I also knew that her career would be more important than her personal life, and proof of this was the absence of a ring on her ring finger, despite the barely visible mark of it on her skin. "Just one marriage?" I asked, showing my left hand and wiggling my fingers. "Yes, he was a good man. He just couldn't handle the time I needed to achieve my goals. I didn't lie to him, just as I didn't lie to you." "No, she didn't lie to me. She explained everything directly." "And you, Nicholas? Did you become a translator at the UN or do something equally noble? Wife and 17 children?" I told her how I got the job at 529 and how it developed. Then I took out my phone and showed her pictures of Tracy and the kids. She seemed very happy for me. We drank a couple more cocktails, then I paid the bartender and said goodbye. She leaned over and kissed me tenderly on the cheek. I answered her the same. We exchanged cell phone numbers, mostly out of politeness, because I knew she would never have time to answer my calls. Tracy returned to work part-time when our youngest child entered high school. 6 months after my youngest graduated from high school and left for college, she returned full-time. She worked in the PR department for a local college and seemed to really enjoy her job. Our family life continued as usual, except for the new feeling that we were now an empty nester. It took us a while to get used to it, but one Sunday we decided to take a walk down memory lane and basically stayed in bed all day. The difference was that we were both 46 years old now, as opposed to when we were in our early 20s. I admit that I slept like a log that night, and the next morning my muscles were sore when I got to work. "Hey, Grandpa, forgot your staff?" One of the young colleagues teased me as I limped slightly, heading to the break room for my first cup of coffee. Tracy left her university job a couple of years later to work for a large financial services company that was moving from upstate New York to the DC metro area. Since they were new to the area and she had been working here for a long time, she noted that she would have significant influence over various aspects of the company, including things like how the company's non-business expenses were allocated. She noted that she may have to stay late working on some projects, but this should not greatly affect our family life. I supported her decision and told her to go towards her goal. I didn't think much of it at first, but about a month after Tracy started working at the finance company, she started staying late at work for an hour or two about twice a week, and sometimes came home around 10 or 11 p.m. She attributed this to dinners with important clients and/or leaders of non-profit organizations that her firm worked with, which made sense given her position. I didn't notice any change in her behavior at home, and she still seemed like the loving wife I'd always known, but I still got the strange feeling from time to time, like she was trying too hard to be Mrs. Perfect. A few months later, her parents came from New York to visit us. At one point, Tracy and her mother were in the kitchen, and her father and I were watching sports on TV in the living room and just talking about this and that. "And how does Tracy like working for Dennis O'Brien? I heard he took over most of the management from his dad, Chuck, a couple of years ago." "Good for Chuck. He was a couple of years younger than me, if I remember correctly, so he's probably about 65 years old now," Joe Patrick said. "Did Tracy know her boss before she started working for him?" I asked as casually as possible, trying not to show too much concern. She never mentioned it." "Oh yeah, the O'Briens lived just a few blocks away from us when the kids were growing up." Tracy and Dennis were a couple for the last 2 years of high school. They were even prom king and queen. For a couple of minutes, I thought he was going to be my brother-in-law, but he broke up with Tracy a few months after he enrolled at the University of Michigan. She was very upset at the time, but you know how that is when you're young. I nodded, holding back the bitterness rushing out. Tracy and I didn't talk much about our past romances. Her past did not concern me, just as mine did not concern her. But one would expect her to mention that her new boss was her ex. I maintained my composure, but realized that I needed to at least test my trust in my wife. I deftly changed the subject of conversation with Joe, but my brain was already working at full capacity. I didn't even have to take any action before Tracy and her boss revealed their own betrayal, although I'm sure they didn't even realize it at the time. It all happened because of a simple action shown on the local television news. At first I didn't see it, but the good thing about the internet is that if something gets on TV, it stays there forever. What a colleague thought was good news, the opportunity to see my wife on television turned out to be the worst day of my life. Dennis O'Brien decided it would be a good PR move to organize a charity event in support of the Washington police to raise money for new equipment. They called the promotion Love Ya Blue, possibly taking the idea from an old theme the Houston Oilers used when they were coached by Bam Phillips. O'Brien and Tracy had been working on the event for a long time, and the company held a press conference to announce its launch. I didn't see the press conference, but several of my colleagues did and came into my office to tell me that my wife was at the noon news with her boss. The three of us turned on the video on the CBS website. Tracy spoke first at the microphone and then introduced Dennis O'Brien, who walked up to the microphone, leaned towards Tracy. She put her hands on his forearms, and he kissed her tenderly on the lips. Nothing too showy, just a soft, casual kiss, the same one I gave her in the morning when I left for work. Crap, I growled, which greatly shocked my three colleagues. This bastard is sleeping with my wife. I'll kill them both. I jumped out of my chair, but my colleagues were smart enough to stop me, despite my threats of physical harm. One of them called the security guard, the other called Mr. Turner, and both came running to my office. Mr. Turner was like a second father to me, so when he came in and told me to calm down and explain what happened, I took a few deep breaths and pressed play on the video. Mr. Turner instantly realized what he was seeing. "Oh shit," he muttered. "What?" asked Tom Ammerman, one of three colleagues in the room. "What do you guys see that we don't see?" "Look at how they kiss, Tom," Mr. Turner explained softly. "No, it's not an ostentatious kiss. He doesn't stick his tongue down her throat, but she gently holds his forearms, and this kiss is too familiar to be anything ordinary. They're too close not to have some kind of romance." "Oh shit," Tom whispered. "This is exactly the same kiss I give my wife in the morning when I leave for work." The room fell silent, and all six men in the office suddenly became thoughtful. "I need to take the rest of the day off, Mr. Turner," I finally said, breaking the silence. "I understand, Trick. You have accumulated many unused days. Don't do anything stupid, son." Before he left, Mr. Turner gave me the business card of a private investigator whom our company sometimes used to vet potential employees. It's not cheap, but it's the best, and very discreet. I was a shell of myself as I left the office in a daze. I saw pity in the eyes of Mr. Turner and my colleagues. In a few short weeks, I went from the happiest married man in the world to a suspicious husband to a devastated man. How much of this was a lie? Did she marry me just because she couldn't be with him? Were there other men before him? I literally felt sick when I left the building. I was angry, hurt, and confused. What did I do wrong to deserve this? I called the private investigator on the way home and made an appointment for the next day. There was no point in procrastinating when your heart was being torn apart. Then I drove home and drank myself into alcohol with a bottle of Jameson's Black Barrel. Tracy got home around 6, and by then I had already finished a third of the bottle of Irish whiskey. She entered the house smiling and cheerful, triumphant at the success of the event, but one look at me told her that something was wrong. I was sitting in my favorite lazy boy chair, leaning back, and she wrapped her arms around my body, resting her head next to mine, and gave me a soft kiss on the lips, the same one she gave to her damn boss a few hours earlier. Her damn boss, a comfortable, familiar kiss, a kiss that until today told me that she belonged to me and only me. Now it was just an empty gesture. It took all my restraint not to throw her off my lap and rip everything back out. "Do you want to talk about it?" she whispered to me. "Should we go upstairs and I'll try to make things better?" "No, I'll just stay here and drown my sorrows alone. I don't want to ruin your day," I replied. "I think it's clear from your mood that today was a successful PR day for you and Dennis." "You didn't have time to watch the report, did you?" she asked. "It was a great day for us. Wait, I'll bring the tablet and show you the video." "Maybe later. I have a serious problem here that I need to think about." We didn't have sex that night, and we didn't have sex for the next week either. On the third night, Tracy made a token attempt to initiate intimacy, but that was where it ended. At that moment, I realized that my loving wife had been holding herself back from me and had been doing so for a long time. Previously, the initiative came from both of us equally, but in the last year, if I didn't start, then nothing happened. She kept me satisfied and unaware of problems, always responding to my desires, but now that she had a lover, she was happy to not take the initiative with me. Not that I had any doubts, but after 2 weeks the private detective already had enough evidence to confirm my theory about her cheating as a fact. He had photos and videos of 5 different encounters, including one with Tracy hunched over his desk in his office. In the middle of the workday, according to the timestamp. This video appears to have been captured by the company's internal security system, which means this creep knew he was being filmed, while I'm sure Tracy had no idea. I didn't ask how the detective got the video. I knew we couldn't use it in court, but for me, it was another dagger in the heart. On Saturday evening, I invited Tracy to dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant. While we were having dinner, I told her that I was leaving on a business trip to New York for a week on Monday. I noted that since she had been spending a lot of time with Dennis O'Brien lately, maybe she could come to New York with me and we could turn the trip into a mini vacation to reconnect. At that moment, Tracy raised her head from her plate, and there was more panic on her face than surprise at my proposal. She seemed about to say something, but then changed her mind and lowered her eyes again. "I can't just leave without telling Dennis," she said. "Honestly, I'm not sure if he can cope without me if I don't prepare everything in advance." "Yes, Tracy, I understand that you spend a lot of time at work, but I wasn't complaining, was I? Yes, I've noticed that you've gotten closer to Dennis over the years, but I don't think you need to worry about him. He's just your boss, and you are the love of my life. You are the only man in my life, and I hope that I am the only woman in your life," she said, looking into my eyes. Given the information I already had, I knew Tracy was feeding me lies, so I tried to keep a smile on my face. "Should we order dessert to go and eat it in bed?" I suggested. She nodded. "Along with other nice things," she whispered. "The line between love and passion is sometimes blurred in life, and that night it was especially blurry for me. I had loved this woman all my life and knew that despite my anger at her at the moment, I would always love her to some extent. I couldn't just turn off this feeling. If this was to be our last night of love, I wanted to give her an evening that she would remember for a long time, even when she was lying in the arms of another man. We never got to dessert. I was obsessed and focused on one task to please her. I gave her more pain than ever before as a kind of punishment, and I also gave her more pleasure than ever before, again as a punishment. Try to top that, Dennis Bloody O'Brien. On Sunday night, Tracy was too sensitive to have sex. On Monday morning, as I was getting ready to leave, I received my usual kiss goodbye, and, controlling my anger, I left. I drove to the supermarket and liquor store to stock up on supplies to hide out in one of the squalid motels in town while I was supposedly on a business trip. I knew that no one would see me who could tell Tracy anything that I was on this side of town. Although I officially took a week off, I actually got a lot of work done while holed up in a motel on Monday and Tuesday. I figured that since I was out of town, there was no need for the lovers to arrange secret dates, and my detective had no news. On Wednesday, however, they both left work early and met within minutes at a trendy Irish pub on the city's north side. After dinner, they drove to Dennis' house in separate cars. At least she showed common sense and did not have sex with him in our marital bed. My detective alerted me when the gymnastic exercises began, and I knew he was recording. The last time he called me was around 2 in the morning, telling me that it looked like Tracy would be staying the night with Mr. Wonderful. I set my alarm for 5 in the morning, and by 7 o'clock I was parked in the middle of his driveway, since apparently he asked Tracy to park in the open space in his garage. I was halfway through the morning paper and my second donut when the garage door started going up at 7:30. I probably could have acted like a complete jerk, but I decided to honk the horn when Tracy started to pull out, not expecting anyone to be standing in the driveway. She stopped the car abruptly, and I saw Dennis slowly climb out of the front seat of his car. I watched them both from the front seat of my car. Tracy's eyes nearly popped out of her head when she saw me get out of the car in the driveway. "Tell me again that you love only me," I shouted to her. This little bastard didn't look happy when he got closer, but then he made the biggest mistake of his life by telling me that I couldn't talk to my wife like that. I rushed towards him, lowered my shoulder just before contact, and lifting it up, forcefully threw him onto his back, throwing myself on top. I thought I heard a rib crack right before he let out a groan. I growled as I stood up from his body. Tracy looked at me like I was crazy and then ran to Dennis while I slowly walked back to my car. "You should call an ambulance and not move him too much so that the broken rib doesn't puncture his lung," I spat in the face of my almost ex-wife. I saw her lips move, but there were no sounds. Her lover made enough sounds, mostly plaintive moans. I got into the car and drove back to the apartment where I was staying. The police showed up at my apartment an hour later, and I was handcuffed and taken to jail for assaulting the pathetic bastard. O'Brien didn't seem to like the pain his cracked rib was causing. I used my only telephone privilege not to call my lawyer, but to call a journalist friend from the city's largest newspaper. He found my arrest interesting, and 2 hours after the call, I was free again. Who would have thought? An hour after I returned to my apartment, Tracy knocked on my door. "We need to talk, Trick," she said, and that was the biggest underestimation of what had happened in the last few years. I threw the door wide open and motioned for her to come in. "Why? Just tell me why," I whispered. "I'm not sure. I still love you, Trick, I really do. But Dennis and I had a story." "So you still love him, even after all these years with me?" I cried. "Did you ever love me at all? Was I just a pathetic replacement for him? What about children? You just couldn't keep your legs together, right?" My thoughts were filled with emotions, from rage to confusion. She'll never know how close I've come to punching her in the face right now. She looked at me with pity in her eyes. I knew it was over between us, and I knew that one broken rib wasn't enough for this bastard. "I will file for divorce. Get yourself a lawyer, and at least we can act like adults," I said. "And make sure that idiot doesn't cross paths with me. Next time I won't be so merciful." Our week-long project in New York was a huge success, and 529 orthopedics threw a huge party in the upstairs room of our hotel on Saturday night. The party was attended by all of the city's most powerful doctors and hospital administrators, as well as senior management from 529. I was surprised to see one of the city's most famous heart surgeons at the party when she walked into the room. All heads turned when Dr. Angela Tellerico walked into the room, looking stunning in a low-cut black dress and 4-inch stilettos. Her light brown hair was curled at the ends and reached just below her shoulders. Her signature large glasses had thinner frames than the last time I saw her. I knew some heads turned because some people in the room knew it was the same Dr. Angela Tellerico, but most people turned their heads because this beautiful, sexy woman of 50 walked into the room and stole the show. It took my breath away when I saw her look around, notice me, and confidently walk towards me. Perhaps it was because I hadn't dated women since my divorce 4 years ago, or perhaps it was because it was Angela. I was with a small group of people when I noticed her enter and quickly excused myself and headed towards her. I gave her a crooked smile, and then we hugged. We exchanged a light kiss on the lips. A strange silence suddenly fell in the hall. "Bella," I whispered in Italian, knowing that she remembered the language she studied at school. She gave me a dazzling smile. Suddenly, I noticed the buzz of conversations around the hall. "I hope you don't mind me crashing into your orthopedic party, Nicholas," she said flirtatiously. "Never," I replied. "I'm so glad you came." I took her to the bar, where I ordered a Tanqueray and tonic. At my request, she told me about her life as one of the best heart surgeons in New York. I noticed that she still didn't have her wedding ring on her finger. "Tell me you're still alone and there's no Mr. Tallarico," I finally asked. She hesitated, cleared her throat. She looked guilty. "I don't have time for Mr. Tallarico. If I wanted to, which I don't think I do," she replied. "I had a few boyfriends after my divorce, but nothing serious. You know how I am." "Unfortunately, I know. You always follow your head and not your heart," I said, first touching her head and then her chest above her large breasts. "When will you let your heart win?" "I already allowed it once, remember? It didn't end well for me." "Just the wrong person. This happens. Forget it," I said. "How did you forget your wife, although 24 years is much longer than my 6? I looked at her angrily and wondered how she even knew about my divorce, but then I remembered that it was Angela. We've always been completely honest with each other. Well, almost always. She studied my face for a long time. I looked into her eyes and was almost sure that I saw what I was looking for there. "You look great," I said as we drank our drinks. "You made an impressive entrance." I'm sure I did. Dr. Angela Tallarico always makes an impressive appearance. There are at least a dozen doctors and administrators here right now wondering what the hell I'm doing here. "I'm glad you came. Let me introduce you to the person who is important to me." With Angela on my arm, I walked around the room until I found Ralph Turner. He was one of the few people I told about Angela. "So that's what she is, the beautiful Dr. Angela Tallarico." "I am truly honored," said Mr. Turner in his most courteous tone. Angela actually blushed. This didn't happen to her often, but somehow she understood what he meant to me. The evening turned into a wonderful time, and then it turned into a wonderful night. Angela didn't hesitate when I asked her to come up to my room after the party. We made love again early in the morning before I called her a taxi and headed to the airport with my 529 team. The flight home was short, but enough time for Mr. Turner to sit next to me and ask how I could let Angela go. "For such a smart guy, Trick, you're a complete fool," he said. "Marry this woman. Marry her as soon as possible. Marry her tomorrow. You know I'm right." He looked me straight in the eye, stood up, and returned to his seat. I knew he was right. The question was, could I ever convince Angela? 2 weeks later, I found myself on the doorstep of Patrick and Lorraine Tallarico, Angela's parents. We were never officially introduced, although I always knew about them. I knew that they were incredibly important to Angela and influenced the person she became. They were strict teachers, and I knew that they were the driving force that made Angela strive for excellence. I also remembered that they didn't seem particularly impressed with me. That was many years ago, and now I hope to enlist their support in my quest to win their daughter's heart. Angela's heart was a prize worth fighting for, and at 50, I was willing to risk it all. I had already turned down this opportunity once, but I had no intention of repeating that mistake. I spent Friday evening and part of Saturday talking with Angela's parents, explaining how I felt about their daughter and why I was confident that I could make her happy for the rest of her life. I didn't hide anything, not even my marriage and divorce from Tracy. I think I surprised her parents when we started discussing financial matters because it turned out that I made about 5 times more than the respected Dr. Tallarico. "Just because you speak several languages?" asked her father. "Simply for speaking multiple languages to CEOs around the world, in a field that will only grow," I replied confidently but modestly. We then moved on to a more difficult question. how to crack the code that their daughter had. If you know her well, you know she is focused and dedicated to her patients. How are you going to convince her to think about herself? Asked her father. This will be my task. Just convince me that you are on my side, I said. Angela's mother jumped up from the chair she was sitting in and practically strangled me in her arms. As I tried to catch my breath, Patrick shook my hand and wished me good luck in Italian, buona fortuna. I took it as their blessing. I made an appointment with Angela 2 weeks in advance and took the weekend off during this period with Mr. Turner's permission. I asked her to dress up, and on Friday evening I showed up at her house with a bracelet bouquet of flowers. Then I took her to the limo I rented, and we drove to East Meadow on Long Island to my favorite Italian restaurant, Borelli's. Borelli's was still an old-fashioned enough place where I could ask for an Italian-speaking waiter, and he would only speak Italian at our table the entire evening. Being Italian and having studied the language at school, Angela could speak and understand some of what was being said. But the waiter and I were talking too fast for her to follow the conversation, so I ended up ordering food for both of us. And, well, intermediary, we even put on quite a show when the manager came out to greet me in Italian, like a long-lost brother. After dinner, we headed back into town where I made a reservation at an upscale dance club. As we approached the club, I noticed that Angela realized something and her face turned red. It's kind of a remake of the prom, isn't it? She said with delight. Prom is for losers, I teased her. Remember, we were too busy going to the movies to find time for prom. We laughed like a couple of idiots and then went inside and danced the night away. When we arrived at her house around 2 in the morning, I walked her to the door and then, very formally, thanked her for a wonderful evening. I gave her a chaste kiss on the lips, but before I could leave her porch, she grabbed me by the lapels of my tuxedo and gave me the most passionate kiss I had ever received. I'm sure I turned red as a tomato and Angela was breathing heavily. Why don't you let the limo go for the night? She croaked. I didn't need to be told twice. When we finally finished, we just lay there, seemingly fused into one by our bodies and sweat. I don't know about her, but I felt like I was 18 again, and I thought now was the right time. Angela, have you ever thought about how you want to spend your retirement years? I asked. Honestly, no, Nicholas, she replied. I still have a lot of years ahead of me, so no, I haven't really thought about it. And besides, you know I'm not very good at multitasking. I was hoping for something more than this answer. Crap. However, I am persistent. Okay, but we still need to move on. Our graduation isn't over yet, I said. Are you sure you want to continue? She asked. Oh yes, we still have a lot to do, I replied. I took a bag of clothes with me, and we decided to spend the next day more casually. Lunch, a little shopping, dinner, and then a Broadway show, followed by a couple of cocktails at another cozy restaurant. We spent the night in my hotel room again, doing the same things we did the night before, but this time we went to bed a little earlier because I told her I had a special breakfast planned on Long Island. We were both a little tired when we got up at 7 in the morning, and we took a shower together without being distracted by pranks to make it faster. By 8 o'clock, we were in my rental car, heading down the Long Island Express, which was pretty empty at this time on a Sunday morning. As I turned off Lye and headed toward Kamak, Angela had a strange look on her face, and I knew she was starting to have an idea. Her parents were waiting for us on the porch when we arrived. Her parents greeted me like a long-lost son, but I whispered to her mother that Angela wasn't particularly interested in marriage while we were hugging. She looked surprised but told me not to give up. For her part, Angela looked taken aback by her parents' warm welcome. We started with fresh baked goods that I asked her parents to buy from a local bakery, but then we were treated to a culinary extravaganza from Angela's mom. We ate like kings, and the conversation mostly revolved around Angela's childhood. We laughed a lot at the table. It ended with smoky mimosas, and it wasn't until she was almost finished with her glass that she noticed there was something at the bottom. It was a custom 3-carat diamond ring from Tiffany and Company that I hid in her glass on purpose. Nicholas, no, you couldn't do that, she whispered, almost crying. I, I can't accept this. You can accept it, her mother interjected in a stern tone before breaking into a wide smile. It's time for Dr. Tallarico to become Dr. Tallarico Tritz. Trick. Oh, damn, what's next? Angela, I'm not trying to take away everything you've accomplished, but there's more to life than just work. Look at your parents. They've been together for 50 years and still look like they're very much in love. Do you enjoy the time we spend together? I like it, and I want to wake up with you every morning, knowing that we will be together every day. And then something happened that I would never have expected. Angela began to cry and then burst into sobs. I hugged her, and when her mother handed me the dried ring, I gently pulled Angela away and placed it on her finger. She looked at her hand as if she was seeing her fingers for the first time, then she leaned towards me and gave me a kiss full of passion. I don't know how long we kissed before I heard her father clear his throat. We stopped immediately. We weren't that stupid. With Mr. Turner's approval, I changed my 529 status to consultant and was based in New York. Angela and I bought a cozy house in the suburbs and got married a year later. My children were happy for me, although they both thought Angela was a little strict. I must admit that Angela was quite reserved with my children. She didn't have children of her own, and I knew that motherhood had never been at the top of her priorities in the past. But when my children had children of their own, all her restraint disappeared, and in the blink of an eye. She may not have wanted to be a mother, but her grandmotherly instinct was huge. No, rather funny. This earned her huge points with my children, and they were able to form strong bonds. The grandchildren were the only reason I ever crossed paths with my ex-wife and her second husband, Dennis. We weren't trying to be best friends, but we could be polite, especially around our children and grandchildren. True, Dennis was still a little upset with me for breaking his rib, but he probably realized that I could have done much more and really hurt him badly. Well deserved. Waking up next to Angela every morning is a joy. Our life together has been good, although sometimes she still gets a little carried away with work. This is understandable given what she does, but at times like these, I give her a day or two to breathe and then bring her back to reality. She always apologizes for going a little overboard, and we usually spend the whole weekend in bed, although of course we're not the same in our 50s as we were in our 20s. Most of the time we just lie in bed, cuddling or huddling close to each other, discussing everything in the world and nothing. We are best friends, lovers, spouses. We both plan to retire at 60 and travel the world a lot. Maybe I should learn another seventh language. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.